Welcome, fellow Rotarians. It is both my honor and delight to introduce to you a dear friend of mine and also today's speaker, Richard Babb. Richard was born in Aberdeen, but as a Methodist minister's son, he found himself living in various towns in Northeast Mississippi, including Becker and Marigold, Hernando, Charleston, Ripley, Columbus, and Amory. He's a graduate of Ripley High School, Mississippi State University, Vanderbilt University, and the University of Mississippi. Richard moved to Tupelo in 2007, where he practiced law for a time and took a while off to serve as district chief of staff for former Congressman Travis Childers. In 2012, he was appointed by then Mayor Jack Reed to serve as our city prosecutor, following then Congressman Trent Kelly. So please help me welcome a dear friend of mine, Tupelo City Prosecutor, Richard Babb.
Thank you, Harold. Can everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm making sure. I want to thank my old friend Harold Plunkett for inviting me to speak to the Tupelo Rotary Club. I don't get too many invitations to speak to clubs these days. And I did make a few notes, so I'm going to stick to the script so I don't wander too far. But for whatever reason, I've never been a member of a civic club. Now, I was a member of a fraternity at Mississippi State. Buddy Stubbs and Holland and Mike Armour pulled some strings and got me in, but the last time I checked, I don't know that a fraternity qualifies as a civic club. Then again, I'm a little bit like Groucho Marx, and for those of you who are of a certain age, that is young, Groucho Marx was a legendary comedian. He died in the 1970s, and he once noted he would never want to belong to a club that would have him as a member. Nevertheless, I'm glad to be visiting, if by Zoom. So I'm here to talk about being the City of Tupelo prosecutor and Tupelo Municipal Court, which is located right behind the historic Lyric Theater. And I know some of you have probably been in city court in some official capacity, but I'm not mentioning names. A brief overview of Tupelo City Court. Let me go to my papers here. We handle between 200 to 400 cases in court per week. Now, this is pre-pandemic. The clerks handle in some form, say from docketing to discovery to answering calls, just whatever, about 5,000 cases per week. So you can extrapolate the number for the year and see how many cases we handle. We are, in fact, one of the busiest courts in the state of Mississippi. Now, we are primarily a misdemeanor court, which is, of course, the lowest level of crime. That is, we handle traffic tickets, other traffic offenses, DUIs, domestic violence, shoplifting, simple assaults, code violations, as opposed to felonies, which, of course, are handled by the district attorney's office. John Weddle, I've known John for many years, a very good person. However, a couple of years back, Mayor Shelton and the City Council directed that we begin handling the initial appearances and preliminary hearings on felonies. Those are the serious crimes committed within the city limits of Tupelo. What had happened, and not to bore you, but what had happened was that the Mississippi Supreme Court had handed down certain rules, and were being pretty hard about it, that an initial appearance / bond setting must be held within 48 hours of an arrest. And a preliminary hearing was to be held within 14 days of the initial appearance. And up to that point, felonies committed in Tupelo city limits were being handled through Lee County Justice Court, and maybe they were not being expedited. So Mayor Shelton and the City Council said to us at City Court, y'all take over the preliminary issues on the felonies. So we've taken them over, And because of the Supreme Court rules, we are getting to be like the gates of hell, open 24 hours a day. I've had numerous cases on Sundays to comply with this rule. And because of the pandemic and Zoom, we might even have a hearing or two at night, such as I did last week. Now, Jay Ware and Willie Allen are our city judges, and in my opinion, they do an outstanding job. They are fair judges, and while I tend to work in front of them, whenever we try a case, they weigh the evidence in a trial, and if, in their opinion, I'm not met the burden of proof, which of course in a criminal case is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, they have no problem looking at me and saying not guilty. I will tell you this, especially if you're an inveterate reader of the crime portion of the Daily Journal. Since we've been doing the bond settings on felonies, both Judge Allen and both Jay Ware adhere to a rule that if someone uses a weapon in the commission of a felony crime, at the initial appearance / bond setting, the defendant is going to receive an extremely high bond. It's just going to happen that way. Just the other day, for instance, we had one neighbor shooting at the pickup of another neighbor, and Judge Allen said $1 million bond. Our court administrator is John Knight. John graduated from Ole Miss, where he played both football and baseball. He decided to become a cop. Came to Tupelo, and through the years, he worked his way up from patrolman to bailiff in the courtroom, and now to court administrator. It's interesting to note that I know I'm talking about court, but cops are obviously involved in this. It's interesting to note that any number of our cops have graduated college. I know one who graduated with a degree in English. I know another cop who graduated with a philosophy degree. I have found most of our cops to be eminently reasonable people. Let me go ahead and give you some advice in case you don't know this. This is free. If you get pulled over, since we live in strange times, if you get blue lighted, slow down to acknowledge to the cop that you see the blue light, find the safest, nearest place, pull over, keep your hands on the steering wheel, and the cop will come up. And it's important to keep your hands on the steering wheel because we live in a time where there's a proliferation of guns. And if they can see your hands, that will ease the situation considerably. I hear this all the time from cops, by the way. Also, more free advice. Years back, I worked with a highway patrolman. And if you're out running fast on the highway, as some of you no doubt do, and you see a highway patrolman with a radar, hit your brakes and slow down. I'm not saying you won't get a ticket, but it will lessen the probability of you getting a ticket. Don't just keep zooming on fast like, oh, they got me. Hit your brakes and slow down. That is free advice from your local prosecutor here. When I took over for Trent Kelly, Trent sort of left an atmosphere of Tupelo City Court being a bit of a problem-solving court, using the law as sort of an instrument of leverage as opposed to simply treating symptoms. And let me give you an example. As you might imagine, we see many addicted people in our court. From time to time, I have parents who come to see me, or sometimes other family members, and they sit in my office and they are desperately worn out because their loved one is addicted and they are at the end of their rope. And the addicted family member refuses to go into treatment, and the mother or father or the sister or the brother doesn't know what to do to get them there. I mean, you can go to Chancery Court, but they get so backed up, it's hard to get a commitment proceeding on drug addiction rolling. But usually when a family member comes to see me, their addicted loved one has some kind of criminal case in front of me, and they want to know if I can force them into treatment. And the fact of the matter is, some of the time, I can. On any number of occasions, I will go back to the holding cell and I'll talk to the defendant, tell them I understand they have a problem, and ask them if they're ready to face their problem. And it is not uncommon to be met with denial. They don't have a problem. At which point I have to get a little more reality-based and tell them that I'm willing to cut them a deal. They can plead to the charge, and I will recommend to the judge they get a 6-month suspended sentence, which is the maximum sentence we can give in city court, by the way. They can, and they can go to rehab. Or if they don't like that deal, I tell them we can try the case, and if they are found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, I will recommend they go to jail for 6 months. It's their choice. Most, not all, choose to go to rehab, and I explain very carefully to the ones who choose to go to rehab that if they are kicked out or walk out of rehab before they've completed it, then they will go to jail and serve their 6 months. The fact is, I've learned that that last portion is the most important thing I can say. One young man took the deal some years back. He went to rehab. He's been clean and sober now for about 5 years. He came to see me and he sort of gave me feedback on everything he had gone through. And he told me that when he was in rehab, he said he badly wanted to walk out, but he knew, and I'm quoting him at this point, he said, I knew that that mean-ass prosecutor would stick me in jail for 6 months. So I've done that any number of times over the years. And while I'm on the subject, just a word or two about addiction. And let me say at the outset, I'm no expert on addiction. I've been a prosecutor, basically a minor league prosecutor for about 25 years. I've handled hundreds of thousands of cases at this point. I have dealt with addiction so much. So anything I say about addiction comes out of just my experience. I have no special training. I've done some reading in it, and I will defer to anybody in Rotary Club or any mental health addiction expert out there. It touches all of us. In fact, I would wager that in our extended families, there's at least one addict. The more I have done this job, I've just come to the point of not being judgmental about addicts. I can't say that was my mindset when I first started 25 years ago, but I was young and fairly ignorant. So I've learned some things about addiction, a couple of things. And this is something I've learned the past couple of years. I've learned that an addiction may get started because of unprocessed childhood abuse. It may be sexual abuse, it may be physical abuse, or emotional abuse. The data suggests that about 50% of addicts were abused as children. In an earlier career, I was county attorney in Tippah and Benton counties, and it was part of my job to deal with child protective services and allegations of child abuse. And folks, I admit it, I had lived a sheltered life. When I started in youth court prosecuting these kind of cases, I had no idea. When I discovered how children were abused, I would get so angry, I would carry it home. Terrible physical abuse, terrible sexual abuse. And I finally learned something known as professional detachment. I learned to keep my emotions in check and do my job professionally. I didn't care any less, but I learned to bracket my emotions, which is something you have to do. In any case, since I've learned that about 50% of addicts were abused as children, the probation officer, Connie Gray, and I have been querying people as they have come through court. We asked them a few questions, and one of them we ask is, did you suffer any childhood trauma? Mainly Connie asked it. And it turns out it follows the data. It's about 50%. And so many of these addicts have not made the causal connection between their childhood abuse and their addiction. or as one of our judges put it, a child who's been abused ends up doing serious drugs because he or she is trying to outrun the pain, and they can't. But that's not all addicts. And I do think another big issue with addiction is I just think many addicts have the genetic predisposition for it. And once it gets tapped, it's off they go. They've had a good childhood, there's no abuse, but they end up as an addict. And in many cases, I think they're just predisposed to it. Now, I'm no expert, and people can correct me if you need to, but that's just my observation. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, because I've dealt with so much addiction through the years, is that when some family member enters the addiction zone, there's usually someone in the family who becomes the enabler. And I think all of us have heard this term. The fact is, it's been my experience, you have to be really, really reality-based with an addict, because they will lie, cheat, steal to feed their habit. Sometimes they get thrown in jail, and there's perhaps mama or daddy who can't stand their child to be in jail, and they will bail them out, and off the child goes again. And what I see as enabling is what I think is just sort of standard, normal love that you have for someone. But once that person becomes an addict, the dynamics get turned upside down. And so that the love gets exploited by the addict. Now that's, again, I'm no expert, that's just what I've observed. But it's why when I deal with families, I usually recommend they go see a counselor specializing in addiction, so they can figure out a game plan and come to some understanding of the dynamics in which they are dealing. One other thing I'm going to mention that I see a good bit of in city court is domestic abuse. I've seen a lot of domestic abuse over the years. So what happens if you call 911 on a domestic abuse? All right, so the law states, if you call on domestic abuse, the law states that the cops must go. No ifs, ands, and buts. And if the cops see any sign of abuse, they must make an arrest. Now, I will tell you that if you ask any cop, a domestic abuse call is the one that creates the most tension for them. They know they are driving and then walking into an emotionally charged situation. They don't know if someone has a gun, a weapon. There may be children there. They have to protect the children. They simply don't know. And so when they show up, the first thing they're going to do is, quote, secure the scene. That is to make sure no one has a weapon, get people separated, do whatever they need to do, and begin sorting things out. I will tell you, because of the statute mandating arrest, the cops are going to err on the side of caution. And if they see any hint of abuse, someone's going to jail. And their attitude is, we'll let the courts sort it out later. Most abuse cases involve women as the victims, but it's not always the case. If the couple has been married for any length of time, the abuse has probably been ongoing for years. And for whatever reason, the victim stays. Sometimes they stay out of fear. Sometimes they have been what they call traumatically bonded to the abuse, meaning that, I guess, the psychological dynamics have become so familiar to them, it's almost normal. However, the data is clear that the longer one stays with an abuser, the more chances the more the chances increase for serious bodily injury or death. In fact, once the abuse reaches the choking stage, it increases the chances of death substantially. I do talk to victims of abuse quite a bit. The judge's assistant, Sally Williams, has contacts at SAFE, which I think everybody's probably familiar with SAFE, which is for domestic abuse, located in Tupelo. We do what we can to protect the victim. So I just wanted to mention those couple of main issues. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that our head clerk is Rhonda Cole, who does an outstanding job. She's assisted by Susan Reed, Debbie Williamson, Christy Johnson, Chiquita Johnson, Susanna Williams, who's also our interpreter, Sabina Floyd. We have a work program headed up by Joseph Ivy for those who want to work off their fines. We also have a public defender, Dennis Ferris Jr., who's a really good young lawyer, and he represents people mainly in our felony bond issues. And so I just think that we are one of the busiest courts in the state. I happen to think we're one of the best. I've had any number of criminal defense attorneys tell me that they are in circuit, federal, all kinds of courts, and they feel like we've got the best, one of the best run courts that they are in. And in fact, about a year ago, the Mississippi Municipal League meeting, we were recognized by faculty from the School of Law at the University of Mississippi for being one of the best run municipal courts. And with that, I'm going to conclude. If there are any questions, y'all just let me know.
If anyone has questions for Richard, go ahead and unmute and ask away.
This is Randy McCoy. This is Randy McCoy. Richard,
Yes.
What time do y'all start every morning, and what's your typical work day, and that sort of thing? Just what y'all do every day.
Okay. We usually, like as soon as I finish with y'all, I'm going to go and try DUIs this afternoon. But the pandemic has sort of changed things a little bit. We usually are in trial on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays on misdemeanors, but we're going to be in court for felonies any day of the week. And Tuesday's a pretty busy day. You know, usually between 100 and 150 cases on a Tuesday. So we're pretty jammed up, and it's okay. We know how to deal with it, but it can be challenging at times.
Richard, this is Mike Miller. Just curious, what kind of a guitar is that you got back there behind you?
Oh, that is a Martin guitar.
I thought it was a Martin. I could barely read the writing there at the top of the headstock, but it looked like it was probably a Martin.
Yes, a Martin. I'm a hacker. You know, I'm not that good at it, but I enjoy trying.
Yeah, me too. That's why I noticed it.
Randy McCoy again here. Randy McCoy again. Do the police officers have to come and testify to every trial that you have?
Yes, sir. For instance, we have, sometimes people just don't show up for court, and the officer has to come and testify and present to the judge what the person did wrong, even if the person doesn't show up for court. So they have to be there. If they want a conviction on whatever they cited somebody for, they have to be in court.
So does that happen always when they're at work, or is that sometimes on their day off?
Sometimes we try to, the clerks do a good job. They really do try to get them when they're at work, but sometimes they can't, you know, and they have to come in on the day off.
So Richard.
Yes.
So do y'all handle a lot of check fraud under a certain limit?
We do not handle, we handle some credit card fraud, and we handle some forgeries as misdemeanors. We don't do, the DA's office handles any kind of bad check situation. Now, we do handle, I'm trying to think, since we've been doing felonies, we just hadn't that has not come up for some reason. But it's usually if you've got a check issue, you should probably contact the DA's office.
Yeah, I had a client that pursued prosecuting a little theft ring down in South Mississippi. And he said the problem there was that nobody came to represent the losses. He went and prosecuted these individuals, and most banks just kind of write that loss off and
Right.
move on. And these people continue to commit fraud. I'll just show you a stack. That's checks. Those
Right.
are the ones that we've stopped. And it just seems like to me that we're just too busy to prosecute thieves. And
Well, you've got to have a witness.
yeah.
That's the issue. And if I'm not hating on the banks, but if you can't send somebody to prosecute them, it kind of, it's just a problem.
Right. So how similar is your drug court to what Oxford's doing? I know, was it Andy Howarth?
It was, ours is kind of an unofficial drug court that we just sort of instituted. There's an official drug court in circuit court. Andy Howarth instituted that over in that district. Jim Pounds instituted, former Judge Jim Pounds or retired Judge Jim Pounds instituted it in this district. And I think it's a great thing, because my position is addiction is kind of a complex thing, and we'd all be better off if we can get people to become good tax-paying citizens and quit creating trouble. And so in our little court, we just kind of unofficially do our own thing. And that is, if somebody comes in, I'll just look at them and I'll say, well, you got a choice. You want to go to rehab? You want to go to jail? Mm-hmm. And so we try. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
That's right. Are there any more questions for Richard?
Yes, Harold here. Hey, I just want to follow up on
Yes, sir.
Mike Miller. I just want to follow up on Mike Miller. Richard mentioned he's a hacker when it comes to his guitar. I know for a fact that he can work the frets on that Martin guitar that's sitting behind him. He also has an incredibly wonderful tenor voice. He's a Renaissance man. One of his degrees from Vanderbilt is theology. And we've sat many a times, and I've asked Richard's questions, and he can quote those 5th century bishops like it was the back of his hand. He's a prolific reader, and he also used to write an article for the Journal. And I don't think he would mind if I said he's probably putting the finishing touches on a novel right now. So y'all are had the opportunity to listen to a very gifted guy.
Well, I appreciate that, Harold. We just my late uncle said, you just do the best you can, what you got. So,
Well, I got to follow up on the follow up. Then, if that's a Martin, it's a what? It's a D28, or I mean, it's something that came from Gruen guitar.
No, it was made in Mexico. Okay, they're little ones that were made up in Pennsylvania, so. Harold did say I'm a little bit frugal too, so.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Richard, thank you for all you do for the city of Tupelo and for our entire community. And for Richard's also the vice president of the Regional Rehab Center Board, so we greatly appreciate him. And thank you for being on today. Next Monday, we have the CEO of Ashley, which is Mr. Ron Wanick, which should be another great program. So please invite as many people as you can, and we'll open it up to the entire district again next Monday. But again, appreciate all you guys for being on today, and thank you for all you do.